Howdy, glad to be here this afternoon and kind of a cloudy, windy day here in Provo, Utah. This is an ongoing series of classes. Each one of them is valuable. They're not, it's not necessarily sequential in the sense that you would have to have every class in order to understand the subject, but they kind of approach the issue from different angles. Each one of them was a different way, I thought, of looking at the situation of what we call brick walls in genealogical research. This one today is exploring the possibilities. There's been two of them before, resolving the outcome, and both of those are online on the Brigham Young University Family History Library YouTube channel. It's BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. If you go to youtube.com and enter BYU Family History Library, you'll go right to the channel. There's about getting up close to 600 videos on that website, so on that YouTube channel. So it's quite a resource for information about genealogy. There are two more in this series: defining the objective and what to do after you have overcome the brick walls. What are the next steps? And so those will be coming up in weeks that are the next couple of weeks here. I'm going to be using the FamilySearch.org family tree for my examples, and there's a couple of reasons for that. First main reason is that it's an open, free, collaborative source. And so any information that's been acquired and entered into the program by anyone who has been a user of the website will show up. Whether it's accurate or not, obviously that's an issue, and whether it has any particular value is another issue. But most of the time, the information, regardless of what most people would have you think, most of the time, and practically all of the time, the information that we get is useful. There's a lot of changes going back and forth, but those happen in a very, very small percentage of the whole number of people that are on the family tree. I don't recall in all the time, I'm looking here at my ancestor, Pete Hamilton and Margaret Turner, and I can't remember ever having anybody change those people. So, there are some people that get changed a lot, and there are others that don't. And that's just kind of the way the family tree operates. Some of the ideas for this series came from a book called Genealogical Research, a Jurisdictional Approach. And the issue of jurisdictions is extremely important in genealogy. A jurisdiction is an area that could be a virtual area, or it could be a real area. It could be something that exists physically, as far as like a division, a political division, like a state or a county. Or it could be something like the taxing authority that taxed a number of different entities and in different counties, like the United States government. All of those kinds of different entities that are involved in a person's life. And if you start counting them up in your own life, you're going to find that you have a fairly long list of places where information about you and your family has probably been stored by someone. Any place from getting a driver's license to and a birth certificate nowadays, or getting a death certificate when you die, all has to do with people in various different jurisdictions exercising their prerogative to record information. And as genealogists, we need to be aware of all those different jurisdictional levels and take advantage of them and the records they keep to help to find our ancestors. So those are kinds of things. That's just kind of a quick overview. And those basic ideas were set forth pretty plainly in that book, which is still still available. I don't know how many copies, I haven't checked lately, but it's still once in a while available on Amazon for you in a used copy. But I'm not recommending that book particularly, but simply acknowledging that the some of the basis for the ideas that I've learned years ago and that I've acquired came from my friend Arlene Ekel, who was one of the authors of that book. If you have decided that one of your ancestors or relatives is a brick wall, what do you do next? Now, I have had people come to me and say, well, I can't find my parents. I was adopted and I'm looking for my birth parents. And so they said, I have a real brick wall. I just can't find any information at all. Well, okay, the term brick wall is so loosely used that it's hard, really hard to understand exactly what it is that you would need to do next. But there's quite a few things that I've set forth over the years in kind of what I would call methodology. When you talk about a subject like genealogy, you have practical, what you practically do. In other words, the actual day-to-day activities that you are involved in and how you do those activities is called a methodology. So your particular methodology is going to be different than mine, but it varies, but you can always learn something from listening to someone else's way of doing things. Remember, there is a difference, and I emphasize this, that brick walls are not a position where you need help finding additional information. If you are stuck and cannot proceed, that does not mean you have a brick wall. A brick wall is, by definition, someone whose sustained efforts over a long period of time have failed to make any headway in learning about that particular person. And so if you just suddenly get stuck all of a sudden, that's not a brick wall. Don't call it a brick wall. Just say, I need to get some additional places to look, and I need some help in having someone tell me perhaps a different way of looking at this problem so that I can find these people. Most of all, don't panic. Those of you who have read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy probably recognize this. And I think it's appropriate because just as in the Hitchhiker's Guide, the idea is that you push the button and get information. Here in our society, we can now push the buttons and get information, and we can begin to look and find places to do research that perhaps we were totally unaware of. And I could probably give you an example, an exhaustive example, but that would take more time than we have in an hour just to explain how you would go about doing all of this kind of research. So I'm going to jump right into an example of an individual and see how that works. And Margaret Turner is my third great grandmother. And I'm saying that she's a suspected brick wall. The question is she really a brick wall? And if I look at it from that standpoint, from the standpoint that I would consider that term to apply, let's see what happens here. She obviously has no parents added, and it might be important to understand that it's taken over 100 years of family research, and no one has yet found any document recording or documenting Margaret Turner's birth or death or her parents' names. Okay, so there we go. We don't have anything about Margaret Turner. We have an assumed date, and she's been in pedigrees for, at least 100 years. So can we consider this to be a brick wall? Well, let's look at see what we actually have and what we don't have about Margaret Turner. Has there any question that that was her name, or that she was, that there was something that we didn't know about this person that we obviously could. I mean, in other words, are we looking in either the wrong place, or are we looking at the wrong time period, or are we looking for someone who didn't have that name to start with? Well, just to give some perspective, she's my 6th great grandmother. And there are 31 other grandparents in this generation, not counting additional spouses. And actually, there are more spouses, so there's really more than 31 grandparents. There are a lot more, because some of these people had 1 or 2 or 3 wives. But so what does this mean? It means that I have 31 other lines that may not be ending here in my 6th generation that I could carry forth with. So if I spend a lot of time and effort, and I spend years of my life trying to find Margaret Turner, I'm really neglecting all 31 other lines of grandparents, which may in fact do, may not be reasonable. It just may not be, it may not even be helpful. We may in fact be able to find Margaret Turner by doing research with other families. That seems incredible, but it does happen, because right now I am connecting lines that dead end in the family tree from above. What I mean by that is doing research on descendants from my remote ancestors. And as I do the descendancy research, I suddenly begin finding people in the family tree who have no parents listed. And now they have a line going back to, in this case, the 1600s. So this is not impossible. It's just we're basically going to be looking. Now, there's always the possibility that sits out there that this person managed to live their lives without ever creating one record that was preserved. Not one record of this person's life was preserved. And that seems, yeah, it could be possible, and it could have happened. And we are back in the time period where that might have happened. And I'm going, perhaps as we investigate Margaret Turner a little further, we'll see some of those things that could contribute to the fact that she doesn't show up so easily. Okay, so moving along. Okay, so these are all the listed sources. In fact, there are 8 sources, and not all of them showed up on this slide, but these are the kinds of sources that are here. We have Kentucky County marriage. We have an entry for another marriage record, another marriage record. We have an 1850 census record. We have someone who submitted a Sons of the American Revolution membership application mentioning Margaret Turner. We have the 1850 US federal census again, this time in a different location, and we have more Kentucky marriages. So we are not lacking in information to support a conclusion that James Hamilton's wife's name was Margaret Turner. She could have gone by Maggie Turner or any other of the different names that they give for Margaret. And as a matter of fact, we have in my family, and this is in that line, this had my Morgan family line, and we have a whole long line of women in that community, in that one pedigree line, that are named Margaret, including one of my sisters and some of my other ancestors, great grandmother, and all of different people who have the name of Margaret. Sorry. And as we look over here on the side, we can see people who have added that information, and one of the most prominent, and this is just a degree of of how much work may have been done on this is Bessie Sanborn, who's one of my cousins, and she has done an extensive amount of research, and we have on occasion shared that research and visited together. And so it's not uncommon to spend some time working your way through your relatives and talking to them and finding out how much of you really know about this person and what do we really need to know about her. And despite all that, we haven't yet managed to crack through this barrier. So why should we realistically think that we would find more records? Why do we think that there's something else out there? If all these people have done all that work, can come to the conclusion that work's been all done, I don't need to do anything more, this is it, so too bad we can't go further, but that's it. No, that's not it. And the answer is we need to remember the time frame here. This information originated back many years ago. There were people who were doing their genealogy in my lines back even into the 1800s. And basically, the information that they had was extremely limited. And what we have available today online and readily available, of course, absent a pandemic, and is they're readily available. If I wanted to travel around the countryside, which I'm not inclined to do presently, but in other circumstances, I could visit other repositories around the country where there still are records that have not been digitized. So yes, there still are more records today, and there is no evidence that a systematic search has been made of all the available records. All the sources listed, as we'll see in a moment, are rather nearsighted, and they have not actually gone out and looked through the records that should be examined. That doesn't mean it hasn't happened, but no record has been transmitted of any effort, and no records have been found that would indicate that the search for this particular person was complete, was, in the terminology of some genealogists, exhaustive. Okay, so where do we start? Where's the beginning point for this particular kind of issue? Well, before you get into this, before you jump back to Margaret Turner on your fan chart showing that she has no parents and say, oh, let's look for Margaret Turner. Let's make sure that you are actually related back through those many generations, 6 or 7 generations, or 8 or 9 or 10 or 12, back to that person. And so what needs to happen at this point is to see if every person in every generation and every person in the family tree that you're looking at has been has a supporting document that's a valid document that tells a child-parent relationship. That's the key, and I'm going to repeat that probably half a dozen times. But that's the key to this. So do we know that Margaret Turner and James Hamilton had all these children, that got married to all these people, and then had more children and so forth? And did they end up being me? The answer to that is yes, we do have a fairly good supportable genealogy back to James Hamilton. So that's the issue, but not his wife. So the parent-child relationship, once again, I'm just going to explain this a little bit more clearly. When we're talking about parent-child relationship, what we're saying is we need a document that shows that Eliza Ann Hamilton, who is the person in my line that I'm related to, is the daughter of James P. Hamilton and Margaret Turner. If we don't have a document that shows that she is the child of those two people, we may have census documents for Eliza, we may have death certificate, we may have marriage license, a marriage certificate, marriage information. We might have all sorts of information there about Eliza Ann Hamilton. But if we do not have a document that shows that James P. Hamilton and Margaret Turner were her parents, we're dead in the water, folks. You don't go past Eliza Hamilton. She then becomes the figurative end of the line, or the, if you want to call it, brick wall, and not Margaret Turner. So it doesn't matter how many people have put that name in there and how many people have over 100 years have determined that that person was Margaret Turner. It doesn't matter. That person may exist, but they are not the parent of Eliza Ann Hamilton, lacking some kind of documentary support. Okay, so that's what that means is you've got to follow the path. You go back and see, was Harold Morgan the son of John Hamilton Morgan? How do you know that? Well, in this case, we have a birth certificate for Harold Morgan who said his father is John Hamilton Morgan. Fine. Let's go to the next one, Eliza Hamilton, and so forth. In other words, we have documents that show that line, but do not have documents that extend the line further. Okay, so here's the example of some of the documents we have. Here we have Miss Eliza Ann Hamilton, daughter of Mr. James Hamilton, resident of this county, Nicholas County, and this shall be his authority to do so, et cetera, et cetera. So we have Gerard Morgan and Eliza Ann Hamilton, who is the daughter of James Hamilton and a resident of Nicholas County. So that's the document. Here's the document that shows that Eliza Ann Hamilton is related to James and Margaret. So long before you start fussing about getting documents for Margaret Turner, you need to begin the process. You're Margaret Turner, your person at the end of the line. You need to make sure that all this exists. All of these records exist that show that you're actually looking for the right person. So next, go to the next document, and we see that Eliza Ann Hamilton is daughter of James Hamilton in this county. The next document is a document that's signed by James Hamilton and John Hamilton, and it says, solid between above James Hamilton and wife Peggy Turner. Okay, so there's Peggy Turner. And Peggy, like I mentioned earlier, is one of the nicknames for Margaret. And so we have that James Hamilton, who was of Nicholas County again, is able to basically is married to Peggy Turner. And the documents exist. This is what we're looking for. That's, are we satisfied with this? No, we'd always like to have more documents, but at this point, we do have enough to put down on the calendar, on the list, that John Hamilton's wife was Peggy Turner or Margaret Turner, if we use that. Now, we also record Peggy as an alternative name, obviously, and we may need to search records for Peggy Turner because that's how she's referred to in this document. And also, you might notice down in the left-hand corner of this particular document that it's attested by a Morgan. Looks like Joseph Morgan, and that ties this family into the Morgan line. That's at least a possibility that person was part of the Morgans that that are the descendants of these people. Okay, so now we have this marriage bond with James Hamilton married to marry Peggy Turner in Nicholas County. So now we need to look at the dates and see what kinds of things are available on the dates with this particular family. So if just a brief review, if what we're looking for when we look for names, but right now we already have a possibility of some different names for that same person, and she's in a formal legal document as Peggy, and she may never have been named Margaret, and somebody may have simply called her Margaret because Peggy was a nickname for Margaret, and assumed that her real name was Margaret, but maybe her real name was Peggy. And maybe we've been looking for Margaret Turner all these years and have never found, and haven't found her. Now, before you start saying, well, why haven't you done all this stuff? My answer is yes, we've already done all this stuff. These are things that we have gone through already. So I'm reviewing some of the things, the practices, my methodology, and what we would have thought of, all of the things we would have thought of when we were looking at this particular couple. Now, in your own mind, you need to think about your brick walls, and then you need to think about the questions and the concerns that I'm expressing, and think about how you apply those questions and expressions to your own brick wall problem, your own question of the last person in your line that you're really interested in finding and finding the parents to. Okay, so this is, and I deal with brick lines, with end of lines, with people who are looking for the parents of an ancestor, whether it be their grandfather, whether it be their great grandfather, whether it be 5 generations or 10. And I do that constantly. I probably have questions about the end of the line now recently, at least 4 or 5 a week or more. And so this is not something that doesn't come up. This is obviously a very big topic among people who are doing genealogical research. But we need to ask whether we question whether we are looking for the right name. And now we're going to ask about the dates and the places. Do we really need to be more realistic about the dates and the places? Okay, so here's Margaret Turner. She was birthed, we don't know. We have a date, but that's a estimated date based on some of the kinds of things we do with in genealogy of say approximately 20 years before a marriage, and that gives us an approximate birth date. That just gives us a starting place. We'll get into that in a moment. And then we have a marriage, and we know that occurred on 4 October of 1810. So that's a firm date. And we don't have a death date. So we have only a marriage record, which is not unusual to establish. This is particularly true in England, but it happens frequently in early colonial America and right after the Revolution, up until around the mid-1800s. First of all, understand this: Kentucky became a state in 1792. Think about it for a minute. So how many years after when Margaret Turner became a married person did Kentucky exist? And if you'll recall back a few minutes ago, I showed you a list of all of the sources attached to Margaret Turner for on the Family Search family tree, and every one of the resources had to do with Kentucky. Okay, but Kentucky window is very narrow here, because that's only 18 years between the marriage date and when Kentucky became a state. And so what happened before Kentucky became a state? Well, it was part of Virginia. So that's going to come up in a second. And Nicholas County is even newer. It wasn't formed until 1st of June of 1800. So basically, spending your time looking for records in Kentucky was profitable, but may not help once you get to these two thresholds. In other words, if you're looking for records in Nicholas County, there aren't going to be any before 1800. And if you're looking for records in Kentucky, there aren't going to be any in before 1792. That doesn't mean there aren't records, and that doesn't mean there weren't counties, but that also means that you have to start looking at what was going on, what happened when this person in 1790 was supposed to have been born even 2 years before Kentucky became a state. So where was she born? And the answer is very simple. She was born in Virginia. That was the state that had that, or the colony that claimed the part of where we are. So where and when do we look? Depending on the dates, we look someplace besides the places where we have listed, and that is Kentucky and Nicholas County. This is a quick map. This is from an interactive map of the United States that's on the Atlas of Historic County Boundaries on the newberry.org website. If you look for Atlas of Historic County Boundaries, you'll find it immediately. It exhaustively lists and shows the boundaries of every county that existed in America from the earliest settlements up until the present time, and gives exhaustive source material for sourcing all of the boundary changes. And also you can zoom in and look at every single county there and find out when and where and how they were created, and watch how the boundaries change over time. But if you look at this map, you'll see roughly a couple of things, because this is for 1790. You'll see most of the counties on the east of what we call the Piedmont, on that side of the mountains, are towards the ocean in the east coast, are pretty well outlined by 1790. So Virginia is pretty well settled. But when you hit the edge of the mountains along West Virginia and the Appalachians as they run down through Kentucky along the east edges of Kentucky, and you'll see West Virginia there, and that was peeled off in 1862. And you'll see the rough outlines of Kentucky, and that was peeled off in 1792. So if we look at this, we've got to do some history and figure out where the record sets went during all of the boundary changes for counties, as well as the boundaries changes for states, and what that meant in reality. Where are the records? So that is the real initial question before you get even to looking for Margaret Turner in any record. You need to find out where those records are going to be located and where they would most likely have been done. Where did these people come from? Where did they live? Where were they before 18? Where was Margaret Turner's family before 1790? And those are the kinds of questions that you need to be aware of. And just for interest's sake, just so you understand the time frame we're having here, Fort Boonesborough was a frontier fort in Kentucky founded by Daniel Boone and his men, and they crossed the Kentucky River on April 1st, 1775. So, okay, so think about how many Western European people, other than Indians and French, were sitting out there in the forest in Kentucky. And in 1775 is when Daniel Boone walked across and took the people and built their little tiny Boonesborough. which is, by the way, is really kind of out in the middle of nowhere. If you drive to it, it's on little tiny narrow roads, and you get there and it's not very impressive, and not much is left. And so basically that was just a place. And by the way, there are a couple of historical societies in Kentucky that claim that Boonesboro was in their area, but this is kind of a national historical spot, and you're probably, the rest of them are just trying to make some money off of it. But this is interesting that you really, if you look at this closely, it's only 15 years later that Margaret Turner is supposed to have been born in Kentucky. Well, okay. So we'll think about that for a while. Does that even make sense? And how did we come to the conclusion that she was born in Kentucky if we have no birth records? That's the issue. Okay. So what are the estimates? How do we estimate this birth around 1790? Where did that come from? And how do we treat that as genealogists if we're going to do research about that time period? And we have a marriage about 1810, and then we don't have a death date, but we could give an upper limit on a death date of 100 years to 1890. And there's no indication that she lived with any of her children. So if the youngest child shows up in the 1850 census and we don't find Margaret anyplace, then we can assume that she may have died before 1850, which is possible back in that time period, obviously. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, the estimate here, this is the standard estimate from genealogical standpoint. If you have a marriage date, subtract 16 years from the date, then subtract 40 years from the date, and then search the period between the dates. So you're assuming that the girl got married no earlier than 16, which give or take 2 years is probably true. Although we do find a considerable sprinkling of 14-year-old girls getting married. So we have 14-year-old girls, but we could say 16 years for a good thing. And then you search 40 years from the date and start then. So you're going to go back basically into the mid 1700s and start looking for records for this family. And then work forward until you get to the date. And then basically, if you have a marriage record, then you know the person existed at that time. So you may want to do more research if you're looking for a death record or whatever else, or other records that might show her parents. But at this point, you're basically out of records. My question is, how much time did the people who were settling Kentucky, like Daniel Boone and his friends, how much time did they spend writing down the births and deaths of all of the children that were being born? And how long was it before they actually started to do that? So that's an interesting question. So now we go back to the initial question: is why was this person a brick wall? Why hasn't been there anybody no one has been able to find information about this person? The answer is not known, but the speculation on it is rather simple. Rather simple is that we're looking in the wrong place, that Margaret Turner was not born anywhere near Kentucky, that she was born somewhere in Virginia, and we need to look in Virginia. But the problem there, of course, is that all those counties that are in Virginia and all those places she could have lived, and are we going to spend the rest of our lives looking through every record for Margaret Turner? So then you now have a practical reason for why this particular person is the end of the line. It's not because the individuals who are doing the research over the past 100 years did not know what they were doing, or they were looking in the wrong place, or they were looking for the wrong person. It's just simply what they reached was a person whose records could be scattered across any place. Who said she came from Virginia? In other words, we don't know where this person's family came from. They could have come from any place. And why is that the possibility? Because this was the frontier, and people were leaving their farms and going west for a whole variety of reasons. And so when you're looking at that kind of a situation, an historical situation, it's also right after the end of a war. And there's been extensive disruption of the country by armies marching back and forth and fighting. And it's also right after the formation of a new country that's just barely getting a handle on finding the people that exist. So this is all the factors, and when you start thinking about that, it's not unreasonable. It shouldn't dissuade you from making an effort and understanding the situation, but realistically, you should make your decision about the existence of a brick wall based on a full understanding of the circumstances, both historical and from a record-keeping standpoint. Okay, so the next question was, where was she born? If Nicholas County, where she is listed as being married, was formed in 1800, which it was, and this is a quote from the Atlas of Historic County Boundaries, Nicholas was created from Bourbon counties and Mason counties in the Kentucky Acts of 1799, 8th Assembly. So if she was born in 1790, she was born in Kentucky. She may have been born in one of these two counties, Bourbon or Mason. Now, when I mentioned that Daniel Boone crossed the Appalachians and settled in Kentucky, and that he was one of the very first groups of settlers that settled in Kentucky, there was like a stampede over those mountains over the next few years. There was no question that there were a lot of people coming into Kentucky. But basically they were finding a wilderness, and their biggest occupation was cutting down trees so they'd have some place to grow food. So that's basically the issue that we're talking about here. So finding this information may be possible in either one of these two counties, because and the predecessors of these two counties, because then next step we have to do is look to see when Bourbon and Mason counties were formed and what they might have. But the best guess right now is that she was born in Bourbon or Mason County. So we may need to go back further and check another stage back, but there's the first step. So we go out and look for records in Bourbon and Mason counties. There it is, Atlas of Historical County Boundaries. And there's the link again. All these classes are being recorded, so all of the information here is going to be available shortly on the YouTube channel. So you can go into the presentations and stop the presentation, copy out any of the information that you want to copy. We also can make a PDF copy of the slides if you'd like that. Okay, so here we are back to this list of sources, and we're looking at it kind of with a jaundiced eye. So let's because we're confirming that once again we've looked all the way down here and it's all Kentucky. So we just need to know if that's possible. So there's no indication, again, that the records in Virginia have been searched. So if the records were available, here's an old birth index. goes beyond, by the way, this record's restricted. We have the historical county boundaries, and here's Mason County, began in 1789 and was created from Bourbon. So we've got to follow the track of the counties back through the historical changes. And that's why this particular website is so valuable, because it not only gives you a visual, but a written description of every change, and even more information as you go through the county. One of the things the atlas will also let you do is create a GIS file, a K, I think it's KFC or KF, I don't remember what it was, but it's a file that you can download and upload into Google Earth, which I have done on occasion to get more specific. That way you can get down to individual farms and houses as to where the boundaries were. So that may be helpful. So where are the records? That's the big question. So we're back to the initial question, and that is determining where the records are. Are they in which county are they going to be found in, if any? And if even if we look through all these records, we're making an assumption that she may have been recorded in some other county before she got married. And the answer to that is possibly not. So it could be Nicholas, Bourbon, Mason, Kentucky, or Virginia, or some other county. So we've got a lot of places to look. So even though this appears to be a really, really solid brick wall type person, and even though I can say, yes, we've looked a lot of places, I'm not saying that there aren't new records available, or there aren't repositories that could be visited that would reveal additional information. So we would look at all of these places and many other places, because we need to remember, like I mentioned a moment ago, what are the chances that she moved? So here we're back to the initial question. Can we still consider Margaret Turner to be a brick wall person? And back to the sources, the answer is probably not. This is merely a very extensively, and I hate to use the word, but difficult. It's probably a very time-consuming and rather tedious task that would be required, probably going through page by page, thousands of pages of historical records just to look for this one family or one person. And when you got there, you may not know you had the right Margaret Turner, even if you were able to find someone named Margaret Turner. So you could argue that this is a brick wall, and we may never see anyone able to spend the time and the effort on this one person to go back one more generation. And yet someday the document may simply be digitized, flowed out, and be attached as a record hint, and that may be the answer to the whole thing. So you just never know what's going to happen when you get to this particular point. But in any event, considering somebody to be a brick wall is not strictly accurate until there's been that kind of an exhaustive or reasonably exhaustive search in all the possible jurisdictions, every place this person could have possibly lived or been recorded. And with Margaret Turner, we don't have any limit on that. We have no idea where she could have gone. Now, we can argue from historic purposes that her family probably lived in the western part of Virginia before they moved to Kentucky, because they were the most likely ones to move west. but it not impossible that someone on the eastern coast decided to go west and leave their country and drag their kids along and go to Kentucky. It was the window of opportunity, the golden horizon that everybody would go to back then. So we need to be able to show that all the available records for a possible time and location have been adequately searched. And that's not going to happen in many of these cases. It's just because there's not enough information. Now, normally what we would do is start looking for all of her children. Where were her children born? And figure out, but they were born in Nicholas County primarily. And so Nicholas County was the key county there. And maybe some of the early histories would tell us, and we need to go back and look at those early history books. There's still some work that can be done. And at some point, someone, me or someone else, will probably go back and direct attention again to Margaret Turner for another go around. So only then can we begin to say we have a brick wall. So we're really kind of, don't use this term unless you really feel like everybody in your family for 100 years has been looking. If it's merely because you can't find the immigrant or something of that nature, I would say there's probably a lot more places that you can look. And that's why this series has 5 classes, because there's lots of different ways of looking at it and lots of different problems and things that need to be assessed. Okay, well, thanks for watching.